Now, previously, I've talked about how in the attempt to learn skills, the vital thing to do is to get lots of repetitions. You've heard of the 10,000 hours thing. You've heard of, lots of different strategies for learning faster, 80-20 rule and all that. The bottom line is you need to generate many, many repetitions of something that you're trying to learn. And the errors that you generate are also very important for learning. It also turns out that taking rest within the learning episode is very important. I want to be really clear what I'm referring to here. In earlier episodes, I've discussed how when you're trying to learn something, it's beneficial. It's been shown in scientific studies that if you take a 20-minute shallow nap or you simply do nothing after a period of learning, that it enhances the rates of learning and the depth of learning, your ability to learn and remember that information. What I'm about to describe are new data that say that you actually should be injecting rest within the learning episode. Now, I'm not talking about going to sleep while learning. This is the way that the study was done. The study involved having people learn sequences of numbers or keys on a piano. So let's use the keys on a piano example. I'm not a musician, but I think I'll get this correct. They asked people to practice a sequence of keys, G, D, F, E, G. G, D, F, E, G, G, D, F, E, G. And they would practice that either continually for a given amount of time, or they would just do that for 10 seconds. They would play G, D, F, E, G, G, D, F, E, G, G, D, F, E, G, G, D, F, E, G for 10 seconds, and then they would take a 10-second pause, a rest. They would just take a space or a period of time where they do nothing for 10 seconds. Then they would go back to G, D, F, E, G, G, D, F, E, G. So the two conditions essentially were to have people practice continually, lots of repetitions, or to inject or insert these periods of 10 seconds idle time where they're not doing anything, they're not looking at their phone, they're not focusing on anything, they're just letting their mind drift wherever it wants to go, and they are not touching the keys on the keyboard. What they found was that the rates of learning, the skill acquisition and the retention of the skills was significantly faster when they injected these short periods of rest, these 10-second rest periods. And the rates of learning were, when I say significantly faster, were much, much faster. I'll reveal what that was in just a moment. But you might ask, why would this work? Why would it be that injecting these 10-second rest periods would enhance rates of learning? What they called them was micro offline gains, because they're sort of taking their brain offline from the learning task for a moment. Well, it turns out the brain isn't going offline at all. You've probably heard of the hippocampus, the area of the brain involved in memory, and the neocortex, the area of the brain that's involved in processing sensory information. Well, it turns out that during these brief periods of rest, these 10-second rest periods, the hippocampus and the cortex are active in ways such that you get a 20 times repeat of the GDFEG. It's a temporal compression, as they say. So basically the rehearsal continues while you rest, but at 20 times the speed. So if you were normally getting just, let's just say, 5 repetitions of GDFEG, GDFEG, GDFEG per 10 seconds, now you multiply that times 20. In the rest periods, you've practiced it 100 times. Your brain has practiced it. We know this because they were doing brain imaging, functional imaging of these people with brain scanners while they were doing this. This is an absolutely staggering effect. And it's one that, believe it or not, has been hypothesized or thought to exist for a very long time. This effect is called the spacing effect, and it was actually first proposed by Ebbington in 1885. And since then, it's been demonstrated for a huge number of different what they call domains, in the cognitive domain, so for learning languages, in the physical domain, so for learning skills that involve a motor sequence. It's been demonstrated for a huge number of different categories of learning. If you want to learn all about the spacing effect and the categories of learning that it can impact, there's a wonderful review article. I'll provide a link to it. The title of the review article is Parallels Between Spacing Effects During Behavioral and Cellular Learning. What that review really does is it ties the behavioral learning and the improvement of skill to the underlying changes in neurons that can explain that learning. I should mention that the paper that I'm referring to, the more recent paper that injects these 10-second little micro offline gains rest periods, is the work of the laboratory of Leonard Coe. So the takeaway is, if you're trying to learn something, you need to get those reps in, but one way that you can get 20 times the number of reps in is by injecting these little 10-second periods of doing nothing. Again, during those rest periods, you really don't want to attend to anything else as much as possible. You could close your eyes if you want, or you can just simply wait and then get right back into generating repetitions. I find these papers that Cell Reports and other journals have been publishing recently to be fascinating, because they're really helping us understand what are the best protocols for learning anything. And they really leverage the fact that the brain is willing to generate repetitions for us, provided that we give it the rest that it needs. So inject rest throughout the learning period, and if you can, based on the scientific data, you would also want to take a 20-minute nap or a 20-minute decompress period where you're not doing anything after a period of learning. I think those could both synergize in order to enhance learning even further, although that hasn't been looked at yet. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, well, if you can hear me, that's amazing, because what it means is that my voice is causing little tiny changes in the airwaves wherever you happen to be, and that your ears and whatever's contained in those ears and in your brain can take those sound waves and make sense of them. And that is an absolutely fantastic and staggering feat of biology. And yet we understand a lot about how that process works. So I'm going to teach it to you now in simple terms over the next few minutes. So what we call ears have a technical name. That technical name is auricles, but more often they're called pinna. The pinnas, P-I-N-N-A, pinna. And the pinnas of your ears, this outer part that is made of cartilage and stuff, is arranged such that it can capture sound in the best way for your head size. We're going to talk about ear size also, because it turns out that your ears change size across the lifespan, and that how big your ears are, or rather how fast your ears are changing size, is a pretty good indication of how fast you're aging. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I want to talk about these things that we call ears and some of the stuff contained within them that allow us to hear. So the shape of these ears that we have is such that it amplifies high-frequency sounds. High-frequency sounds, as the name suggests, is the squeakier stuff, right? So low-frequency sound. Costello's snoring in the background, that's a low-frequency sound, or high-frequency sound, okay? So we have low-frequency sounds and high-frequency sounds and everything in between. Now those sound waves get captured by our ears